Bree Derrick, how are you?
I'm doing great.
I should call you Director Bree Derrick.
You could just call me Bree.
Okay, Bree, that's work. Thank you for coming in today. You are the Director of the Department of Corrections for the state of Idaho.
That's correct. For about 2 months now.
How's that going for you?
It has been interesting.
Interesting.
I mean, it's been great. It's a total honor to serve in this role, but also it's been busy. I just got back last night around midnight. I spent the last couple of days just up in northern Idaho meeting with like our staff, prosecutors, sheriffs, senators, just driving, logging a lot of miles up in the Lewiston, Moscow area.
Gosh, I can imagine. I actually was up in Winchester a couple weeks ago, on the way to Lewiston, about 45 minutes, I think, south, right? It doesn't matter. You don't need to know exactly, but the most beautiful country I'd ever seen in my life.
It's amazing.
It's like, yeah, truly. Like I was driving, like this can't be real. Like where am I? And again, in the car by myself, I was like kept looking out the window. So I was taking. I know I shouldn't have been on my phone, but I was like taking video of all the ag land, because you have the rapeseed crop that's up there, and it's just beautiful yellow when it's blooming. Like I'd never seen anything like it. Did you know all of that is naturally irrigated? There's no irrigation systems up there.
I did not know
So they don't have pivots. They literally wait for rainwater, and that's just how it goes. And it's consistent enough and reliable enough that they have this entire industry up there. It's like we just wait for the rain to come.
I had no idea.
Yeah, who knew?
But it makes for a beautiful drive.
Gosh, it does. So look, Department of Corrections there's a lot going on with it.
Sure.
Idaho has a large number of incarcerated individuals, and that's a large cost to the state of Idaho. Recidivism is obviously a gigantic thing, and corrections is one of those real conflicts of principle for a lot of people that I speak with, in that the average person believes that if you're a criminal and you've committed bad, crimes and you are now incarcerated, that, you've relinquished some of your rights, obviously, and this is a bad thing and you should not be treated perfectly. But we also have to, of course, provide medical care, and things of that nature that the average citizen doesn't get for free because we're not incarcerated. So that's the initial conflict, where it's like, why do they get all this stuff? And then let's say like our vets don't get all this stuff for free.
Yeah.
That's one problem. The other conflict comes from recognizing that if the correction system is overly damaging to humans, then and under supporting of humans, then we're going to have a higher rate of people coming back into the correction system. So it's like, listen, if I'm in the correction system and I've committed a crime and I'm doing my time, if I leave, you want me to never come back.
Right.
You're like, listen, great to know you. I don't ever want to see you here again. Now, if I leave and I have become a worse person while in the correction system, or if I have not developed skills that would enable me to elevate my life out of the situation I was in previously, I will be back in the correction system.
Right.
And that's bad for everybody. But that means we have to invest something into the time where people are there to make them better. A classic example from I know it's cinema, but in Shawshank Redemption, right? Like they get a library, people start getting degrees, and then they have something to offer the world later on. Like that's kind of what it is, but that takes energy and it takes effort and it takes resources. And these two things are in conflict, because it's like, well, look, if you're a criminal, you shouldn't get anything more. You're already getting like free medical care. It's like, yeah, but do you want them to come back? Right?
Right.
Talk to me about trying to figure out a balance here where we do the best and most honorable thing by Idaho taxpayers and Idaho citizens who want justice.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and our system is it's complicated. And so, I mean, I think what people want is to feel safe ultimately. And for us, we look at what our role is and what we're legally required to do, constitutionally required to do. And you mentioned a couple of those things. So, in our state legislative code, it requires us as an agency to not only house people, keep them in our custody, but also to rehabilitate them. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that part of it. And that's the piece that I spend a lot of time thinking about. How do you do both? How do you make sure people are held accountable for what they've done? And, the court gives them a punishment, and that might be a sentence to prison or a sentence to probation or a rider. And we can talk about what all of those things are. But ultimately, when they come, under our jurisdiction, we have a responsibility to the people of Idaho to help them figure out how do they live differently? How do they get out and become a citizen who's paying their taxes, who's, walking their dog and they're not scaring you in the neighborhood, who, right, just plugs into the community in really productive ways. And so there's the punitive side. Like, you can hold people as accountable as you want, right? You can give them long sentences. You can make prison really uncomfortable. And you're right. You hear people say, they don't have anything coming to them, right? And I agree. There are people who are in our system who have earned their way there. They've all earned their way there, right? But there are also people in our system who are actively working to earn their way out, and they are looking for those opportunities, like you mentioned. And so it really is incumbent on us to figure out, how do we do that work well? How do we invest in the things that give us a good return? How do we focus our programming energy, our educational energies, any of the resources we're going to bring to bear inside of our facilities or for people who are out in supervision, so that when they get done with us, hopefully it's the last time we see them, right? Because that's the goal. The goal isn't, you can talk about recidivism rates and what happens in 1 year or 2 years after people get out, but I actually care about them getting out of the justice system completely, right? Like, I want them to never come back, not just, oh, we made it for a year, good for us. Like, we need to be thinking much more longer term than that.
If you were asked to outline the 3 most influential things that keeps people out of the corrections and justice system once they leave, what are those things? Is it literacy? Is it, having a skills training or a trades skill training program or something like that? Like, what is it where if you had to get, if somebody's like, hey, I got $100 million and I want this $100 million to go to like the number one thing that's going to help us keep people from coming back, what is that thing?
Yes, there's actually a whole bunch of research in this space, so it's great. We have that. So if I'm going to take your bet, I'm probably going to do pretty well on it. But I mean, really, we know that education is one of the best investments we can make. The more education people have, the less likely they are to recidivate, and that's like a pretty direct correlation. We also know that we've got to address criminal thinking. There are a whole bunch of people who come into our system because they actually think in a criminal way. They minimize the impacts of crime to other people. They are looking to make fast money. They don't really kind of buy into convention. They're not looking for a 9-to-5 job. And so we've got to actually change the way that they think about life and about what is successful, right? And I think the third I would really say is connection. What we need to, every human needs to connect, whether that's to their friends and family, it's to their community, it's to their church, it's to whatever groups are important for them. And often what we do in corrections, I would say, and not just in Idaho, but we've really focused on like reducing risk for people. We want to say, those friends you're hanging out with, those are bad people. You shouldn't be around them anymore. You shouldn't be doing those activities anymore. You shouldn't be whatever. And we give a list of like what not to do. But what we don't really help people do as well, and I think we're starting to do this, is how do we get them connected to the people we do want them to hang out with? How do we get them connected to recovery supports in the community and, other groups, other social outfits, so that they're actually like, engaged in the world in a productive way? Because I think there's a difference between somebody getting out and doing everything we ask on supervision. Like, they're showing up and they're taking their drug tests and they're doing great and they're working. And then they go home and they're isolated and they're like sitting in their basement, just white knuckling it to avoid drinking or drugging or getting caught up again. And
right. Or answering the door when their friends come knocking. They're like, come out with us. And like, I can't.
And so we've got to get people to have a whole different network so that they can actually be successful and that they can leave the old life behind.
These are 3 really big things.
Mm-hmm.
If I may go back. So again, you have your education, you have your thinking, and then you have your connections. Mm-hmm. If we look at, if we could dive into these individually, if we look at education as a whole, especially in the state of Idaho, has really gotten a weird name because I think people have decoupled the concept of education from pragmatic results or efficacy or relevancy. And I think there are some areas of education within the United States that have worked really hard for that, right? And the classic examples, like you're going to go spend $250,000 for like gender studies out of, whatever private university. You're going to come out with all this debt. What are you going to do now, right? Or like a master's in, not a master's, but a master's in like art history. And it's like, yeah, you're going to be a barista. It's like the most expensive barista degree ever. So you have these areas that are the classic whipping boys of education. But you're not hearing a lot of people on the other side saying like, yeah, look, you can take those degrees fine, but this is real education. This is an education that you can take to the bank. That's like you show up with this education, you have a skill set, you can trade that skill set for money, like you can engage in gainful employment. This is the most valuable portion of education that we can offer somebody. What is that education? Because I assume it's not a master's in arts history.
It is not.
Okay.
I mean, and really, you got like the folks that come in our doors, most of the time, they don't even have a high school diploma.
Okay.
So for some people, we're starting with adult basic education because it's literacy and you need to be able to read to function in the world, right? But I think you're hitting on a really important point. And we have a whole bunch of apprenticeships and kind of career technical education programs that we do. And those are in construction trades. So we do things like teach people to be electricians, plumbers, to do drywall, to do carpentry, really practical skills that are in high demand here and will pay a livable wage when somebody gets out. So I think that the practicality is important.
Okay. So you focus some on classic education, like, hey, we need to get you to read.
Yeah.
We need to get you to be able to do basic math. Take your biology, throw it out the window. Like, we don't need that science, but from a practical standpoint, you really need the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. So if you're focusing on book-wise stuff for the adult education, that's what you're going to focus on.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And to a functional standpoint, right? Like, you're probably not trying to get people up to, let's say, calculus. If you're focusing on math, it's like, no, we need basic arithmetic skills.
Yes and no. I mean, I would say we have a bit of a STEM program at one of our facilities where they're actually doing kind of computer science and stuff. So they might be doing, I can't speak to calculus specifically, but they might be doing some of that as part of a computer like programming type work. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're starting from this like pretty low level and we're trying to get people to a basic level or even a little beyond, high school diploma or some basic literacy and really get them out with a trade. And particularly if we can do an apprenticeship and a certification, then they leave with that, then they can walk right into jobs. And we have that happen all the time. But I will say we have started, there's the Pell Grant program started back up a couple of years ago. That's a federal program that funds people who are incarcerated. They get the money directly themselves. They like apply for a grant. They're on the hook for that money. And they can pursue degrees in, I assume, probably a lot of different topics.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. When you're talking about apprenticeships and trade training, is that something that's occurring on the corrections facilities? Like, do you have electricians coming to teach them electrical work? Are they leaving to do these things? Are they engaging in gainful employment while under the supervision of the corrections department?
It could be a little bit of both. Okay. So by and large, it happens behind prison walls, and we have instructors who are, certified in all the different trades, or we bring in people who are certified in the trades to teach the students. We have, correctional industries, which is a large opportunity for us. There are people who make a lot of the state furniture. And so you can think about all of the pieces that go into running a manufacturing shop that's making a bunch of desks, say, for state agencies. And so you got people who are learning CAD and, they're doing all the programming and the kind of design, then the build. And so there are opportunities right on the prison grounds for that. But as people progress, if they're moving down into like a community reentry center, they're getting ready to release, there are places where we can get somebody connected to what would be a potential employer. So they might finish some of their apprenticeship hours actually in the community on site, and then they can transition. They might get released from us on a Friday, and on Monday they start working there full time.
Which is like the holy grail for you guys, which is, look, you left on Friday, you had Saturday and Sunday, and you had gainful employment and integration into, contemporary society instantaneously. You have money that you're going to be able to pay rent, because this is one of the things that I've heard is the most brutal aspect of transitioning out. It's like you leave and all of a sudden it's like, okay, leaving for what? leaving to what? Like, I was behind bars here. I was getting food. I was getting shelter. Not a great situation. Fine. Now I'm out and there's nobody providing food. There's nobody, like, maybe you have shelter assistance or something, but it's kind of like, what do I do? Right. And in the absence of having this direct link, it's, yeah, there are programs and funding that you can get in emergency situations. It's my understanding, but it's what you really want is somebody standing on their own 2 feet day one.
That's amazing when that happens. And I'll tell you, that's not the norm, right? What you're describing is actually the norm, where someone comes out and they have a whole host of needs. Their basic housing isn't in place. We do some very limited funding around transitional housing. And, it gets people maybe a couple weeks out on their feet, but pretty quickly you got to be finding other opportunities, and they need gainful employment to be able to fund those. Right. And, so it's a bit of a catch-22 where you're trying to solve a whole host of problems. And, we think about they've got to show up at their PO's office. They've got to be reporting. They've got to be taking drug tests. They've got to be taking classes. And at the same time, we're saying, and go find a house that you can afford and get a job that will take you with your felony record, right? Like, there's just a lot that's going on for people. And so, yeah, ideal situation. If we can get somebody connected and 2 days later they show up, they've got a good paying job and they're off and running. That's amazing when that happens for us.
What is the nature of the supervision when people are leaving the prison walls? Because what I have heard criticism of, like, hey, people are like, this is a criminal, it's been convicted in prison, and they're leaving on their own volition to, like, go do this thing, and we just trust that they're going to come back. And look, again, I don't know anything about corrections, and I don't know anything about these systems. So it's like, okay, yeah, that seems wild to me. But it also sounds like within the context of these types of programs, like, no, there's a place for this person to be, whoever the person is, if they're engaged in this program and they have gone through these steps, there is a place for them to be leaving to engage in this thing and come back, and probably not available to every single person. So you have to be in a unique situation, but that's going to further our ability to make sure that person doesn't come back. So that's a net benefit to everybody if we can get somebody who's responsible enough to do that. But is that kind of what it is, which is a unique situation within the confines of, like, a trades program or something?
Yeah, it's a little broader than that, but let me back out and start at the beginning a bit. So just when you think about prison, I think people often kind of conjure up the images of Lockup or Orange is the New Black or whatever shows on TV right now.
Oh my gosh. I saw one episode of that. I was like, this is terrible. I can't.
Yeah, I can't watch hardly any of them because they're so inaccurate. But anyway, the image we have is like this hardened prison where it's just a cell, slamming doors, and 2 people in a cell. The reality is most of our infrastructure is not built like that. So we have those sites, and we also have a lot of infrastructure that is dormitory style. It's open barracks, and you just can imagine rows of bunks, and you could reach out and touch your neighbors. And so when someone comes in the door, they start at a higher custody level, and they basically have to earn their way to more privileges and more opportunities. And so they do that by they're engaging in their programs, they're doing the right things, they're behaving themselves, they're not getting any misconduct reports. And so over time, they'll classify at a lower custody level. And what you're talking about is what's happening at our community reentry centers. So those are part of our prison. So in the state, we have 10 like traditional prisons, if you will, and we have 5 community reentry centers. We've had them, I understand, since the 80s. They've been long-term here, part of our system, pretty effective part of our system. And they're, we have at any given day right now, I think we're running around 9,800 people who are incarcerated and under our jurisdiction. About 600 of those people, 650, are in community reentry centers. So you can see.
So it's about 7% of the prison population.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. And those people are people who are near the end of their term. So they're getting ready to be potentially paroled out, or they're at the end of their complete term and they could just leave and walk away without any supervision. And so while they're in there, we are trying to get those folks connected to work opportunities. We're trying to, if they need mental health counseling in the community, we're trying to get them connected to that service before they get out so that they know their counselor and they're going to keep showing up. So there are a variety of opportunities where we're bringing people out into the community who are technically still inmates. They're still incarcerated with us. And that mechanism, like I said, it's been on the books for, I think, about 40 years. And it's also not particularly unique. There are across the country, most states have work release type centers. And that's what I think people think of. They think of work release. We call them reentry centers here, but it's basically the same thing. It's that they will go offsite and they work, and they can work in, it could be trades. It could also be that they're your server downtown when you go to a restaurant in Boise. They work all around the community doing all sorts of work. And typically the folks that we work with, the employers, are very happy with them as a workforce because they know there's supervision. They know they're going to show up. They're not going to call out sick, because we are there for oversight. And so they're some of the best employees, actually.
But when you say we are there for oversight, you don't have somebody physically monitoring them at the job, right?
Not all day, no. Okay. But our officers can pop in anytime and do random checks on people. I mean, they're not making a scene of it. Sure. They might actually drop in for a lunch so they can see that the person's still there, that they're working. They'll check in. Yeah.
So this is all that the nature of that program is really, it's like, look, you're about to re-enter on your own 2 feet into this community, and we are doing these baby steps, and I don't mean to be belittling, but like small incremental steps towards you being able to leave tomorrow or next week or next month and know exactly where you're going for work, have a job, right? Or have a resume and references from this job, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But you're moving in that direction. And in the absence of that, if it's, this kind of like walk off this cliff, it's like you're here, and then boom, and you get no help, that leads to greater probability that the person's going to be back at your doorstep.
That is absolutely correct. We have the numbers to show that. And so, you mentioned kind of at the start of our conversation, like you could make this thing really hard. And there are, around the country, there are places who choose to do that, who choose to treat people basically like caged animals while they're incarcerated and really give them very little opportunity, not engage in any of the rehabilitative efforts that we are. And then what you get is a caged animal when they get out, right? Like what you train people to behave in a certain way when you lock them up and you don't give them any opportunity and you're not respectful and you don't engage, right? You're teaching them that's what they should expect from society. And so why should they care? And you hear this, like I remember talking with a guy he's been incarcerated with us for a really long time. And he said, if you come at me with like you're the convict and I'm the boss of you. Yeah. It's like, I'll give you a convict. Right. And he's like a very easygoing guy. He doesn't get in trouble. He does all the programming ever, anything that's given to him, he'll take. But it's a mentality switch, right? If you approach people from a really aggressive, punitive stance, you will get that often in return. And so, that's one of the things we have to be thinking about is somewhere around 97% of our folks who are currently incarcerated, they get out. They're going to be your neighbors. They're going to be my neighbors. Like, how do we want those engagements to go? When I'm in the grocery store, I don't want to, feel like I have to run into a different aisle. I want to be able to walk by somebody and feel like, hey, this is going to be a safe situation. And I want that for everybody else in the community.
Yeah, I want that for everybody in the community too.
Yeah.
And again, to your point, what'd you say, 97% are going to be out? Right. Like, how do we square with that? Not just from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, because, we don't want to continue paying for people. We want them to stand on their own 2 feet. But from a human suffering standpoint, like, you don't want 97% of that population to come out, roughly, 9,300 people to come out over whatever period of time they will, and just have 9,300, like nuclear reactors going into communities that make everybody kind of wiggy and feel uneasy.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that. I mean, the other thing is that the people that go through the community reentry centers, we actually know they do slightly better. So their recidivism rates are a little bit lower, and we'd expect that. The other thing, from a taxpayer perspective, they subsidize those beds. So when they're working in the community, 35% of their income comes back to us as a state. So they're actually funding the beds that they're in to a
Wait, okay. So when somebody gets a job and they're allowed, and during the community reentry, and they're allowed to go off campus essentially to get gainful employment, and they're making, let's say, $10 an hour, $3.50 of that $10 an hour goes back to paying for their stay in the community reentry center.
That's correct.
That's fantastic. I mean,
from a taxpayer perspective, right? It's
fiscal responsibility. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a huge incentive. Those beds are incentivized for people to get the opportunity, and they pay for a portion of their stay, and so and we do that not only from a just fiscal responsibility perspective, but you're teaching people that when you get out in the world, you're going to have rent, you're going to have to pay for gas, you're going to, there are just, you and I pay for all those expenses ourselves. And so people need to get in a habit of making a budget and sticking to a budget. Like those are life skills, right? And like, how do you make ends meet when you're only making $10 an hour?
Yeah. And just having those, like, if you're somebody who's had a hard go at it and perhaps you got incarcerated early on, I remember when I was graduating from college, and again, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college. I remember when I was graduating and somebody told me, they're like, oh, you need to get health insurance. I'm like, how do you mean? Like, what does that mean? They're like, well, you need health insurance in case, she's like, because mind you, like the whole time growing up, like, I guess I had health insurance. Yeah. And then the whole time in college, I didn't go to the hospital very much. But if, like I got overtrained. I was on the rowing team. And I got like horribly overtrained and ended up in the emergency room. It was really bad. I don't know where that bill went. I have no idea. Like, I'm sure the university got billed or something. Like, I don't know how any of this worked, but they, the emphasis was like, no, you're responsible for this now. I'm like, well, how about I just don't do it? They're like, that's a terrible idea. You need to like scrub that off of your dumb head, like instant, like go get health insurance. Because again, upon graduating, I started my own tutoring business. And so I've always been self-employed. I didn't have some employer saying like, okay, well, here's your health insurance. It's like, I don't know anything about it. And that was a difficult time frame for me in learning all of these things. It's like, okay, what level of auto insurance do you want? Yeah. Right? Like, what level of health insurance do you want? Mm-hmm. And, do you want to get renter's insurance? Because guess what? I didn't own a house when I graduated. It's like, why would I need a renter's insurance? Like, you see that 100-gallon fish tank over there? That's a problem. It's like, oh God, like all of these things that, just adulting are really difficult. And I could imagine somebody, coming through, especially if they got incarcerated as a younger person, around the age I was, when I was graduating, it's like, that's a difficult thing. And if you don't have people that are already integrated successfully into it, reminding you like, hey, listen, make sure you have the minimum balance in your checking account. Because if you don't, they're going to charge you like a $25 fee and you don't want to lose $25. I'm like, thanks. Because I realized I got charged last month. I had no idea.
Yeah. No, those life skills are super important. And you're right. I mean, so a lot of people come in our system and they're young, and even some of the ones who come in, they're older, but they haven't had those role models. They haven't had those people.
Right. Which is why they landed in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so one of the things we've done in a more recent build, we built a unit that's an incentive unit in one of our minimum custody facilities. And it has, I mean, this might sound silly, but it has like basically a kitchen, and it has, laundry, self-serve laundry. So usually in prisons, we do all the laundry and we do all the cooking and feeding. And so those are skills that people don't get to practice. And so in this one unit, we said, no, you're going to learn how to do your own laundry. If you separate your whites and your darks, or you choose not to, that's on you, right? But you have to figure out how to use a washing machine, and you have to figure out how to cook a meal. And so, as a prison system, we've just taken away, like the way we've done business historically, we've taken away all the choice and all the responsibility. And I think sometimes we don't fully appreciate that when we just lock people up in cages and we feed them 3 times a day and we provide a meal and, we turn the lights on and make sure there's heat and cooling and all of that. They're not learning how to manage themselves, their schedule. They're not learning how to create structure for themselves. They're not learning how to do basic things like laundry or how to cook. And, they might get out and have kids. And so what are they cooking for their kids if they've only used a microwave and a hot pot? So sometimes it's really basic. And I think, people like in my seat, sometimes we just take for granted that, well, every 40-year-old knows how to do these things. Every 40-year-old knows about insurance, right? But they don't. And so a lot of times we say we're rehabilitating, we're actually habilitating, right? We're teaching people for the very first time some basic life skills.
Man, I have an appreciation for basic life skills. When you said the whites and the darks, it's like, oh God. I remember that. Like laundry and me were probably like, that was one of my most, it's like laundry and flossing. Like I hate both of them so dearly. It's like, you got to do both, man. And by the way, everybody's going to see if you don't. Like there's no way of hiding that one. The second thing you brought up was criminal thinking. And it instantly made me, as silly as this is, it made me think about the Key and Peele skit where there's this comedic skit where one of the characters is like, I got a great gangster robbery idea. He's like, okay. He's like, this is going to be the best bank robbery ever. He's like, okay. And he's like, we go in, and we apply for a job. And he's like, all right. And then he's like, and we show up, learn the whole place. He's like, okay. He's like, and then we work there for like 30 years and they pay us every day. They don't even realize it. And then at the end of 30 years, we walk out with all that cheddar and retirement. And the guy's looking at me like, bro, that's called a job. Like you just, but it came from this perspective of, like, we're going to commit this crime by offering this thing and they're just going to give us money. Right. And it's like, yeah, that's what you do. Like, that's not a crime. That's literally like how we all make it through the world. Like you just offer something to somebody and they offer you money in return and like you exchange your life and like, that's what you do. And it's like, again, I know it's a comedic bit, but there has to be a degree of, as you brought up, it's like, you got to think about the world differently. You got to think about, offering something in exchange, having something to offer in exchange. And that could be a positive, voluntary partnership for both parties. Yeah.
I mean, I think, first of all, the skit sounds like something I actually need to watch.
It's so fantastic. Like,
yeah. But I mean, it is, it's the mindset, right? It's getting people to appreciate that mindset and that, I mean, it'd be awesome if everyone thought that was criminal, and behaved accordingly and just got jobs for 30 years reliably.
Dude, can I tell you something real fast? Yeah. My first tutoring gig, I go out and again, I got into SAT tutoring within like 3 months of graduating. But for the first 3 months when I was intending to go to law school originally, and for the first 3 months of tutoring, I was like, nah, like I'm just going to do this tutoring on the side while I wait for law school. And then I realized like, no, like this is just go right into it. But my first tutoring client was this 5th grader who I was just tutoring in literally like fractions. So I show up horrible, right? Like have like I own one polo shirt, right? I own one pair of khakis and they were like pleated. They was terrible. They didn't fit me well at all. I remember it's like, anyway, so I go to this, there's an office, right? That's like the mom's a realtor and she has this giant office. She's like, just come tutor my kid. I got referred by Strong coach. So I go in and I tutor this kid for like 2 hours in math. And, like, I have a good time. Like, imagine me at 22. I'm like, let's talk fractions. And I leave and she writes me a check and she was paying me some ungodly sum of money. Like I got like $150 or something for 2 hours of tutoring.
That's amazing.
And she cuts me the check and I walk downstairs and I'm like, yes. I literally was like, is this an FBI sting? Like they just gave me money, right? And like 100, because the most I had ever made was $10 an hour. I had worked in the tutoring center at Cal.
Yeah.
And again, like it was that kind of thing. Like, wait, this is how this works? Like I just show up and do this thing and then money. Like that's it? Like
and then money.
Okay, yeah, and then money. It was like, I have money now. And then like I went back 2 days later, I was like, more money. This is wild.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think yes. And getting people to have that experience is what we're trying to do, right? And so many of our folks don't. And they might not have the pleated khakis either to go with the outfit. I don't know.
So bad. So embarrassing. My wife, because we were finding, she's like, you need some more khakis. I was like, I have khakis. She's like, they're pleated. I was like, I don't even know what that means.
You need different khakis.
Yeah, right. I had to hit the gap.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the point is well made, right? That a lot of folks who we're talking about, they don't have that experience. They, and this doesn't take away their crime. So like, I don't want to say that, right? Like we're dealing with adults who've made choices and they've landed themselves in prison where they should be probably. But we have to just acknowledge the context, right? That some people are growing up and their only image is, dad who's in a biker gang or mom who's prostituting or using, and, like these really chaotic environments. And sometimes the people who become our clients were kids during that and they didn't have a role model. And so what they learned is you make money fast. It doesn't matter who you hurt in the process. It doesn't matter if you're stealing stuff because heck, they got insurance. They'll get it replaced. They're not going to miss it, right? Like you dismiss, you minimize, you learn all of these thinking kind of patterns that are very criminal. And that's what we're trying to change. But it's also very much a function of that environment. I mean, we know just having a parent incarcerated increases the odds that you will be incarcerated when you're an adult. And so how do we start to break those cycles? Like, we have to be thinking kind of upstream. So we're dealing with the adults who are in our system, but also we need to be thinking about what are we doing for those kids? What are we doing to keep them out of the system and prevent them from being future customers?
You just said clients and customers. Talk to me about this, because like those are not words that I would associate with. I think the classic term is like inmates or incarcerated or something. So like clients and customers, what is that?
I mean, they're all just people, right? So they're people who are under our jurisdiction, and there's a whole bunch of different avenues for that. So there are people who are incarcerated with us. There are people who are out on supervision. And so it doesn't really matter to me what terminology you use. At the core, I feel like they're people, and we should treat them like people regardless of where they are in the system. The language, I know, is tough for some people, and some people are very wedded to particular language. I don't really have a problem with any of the terminology. So if you want to refer to people as inmates when they're incarcerated, that's accurate. If you want to call them incarcerated people, that's also accurate. It doesn't really bother me that much. I think what's more important is the substance of what we're doing. And I think the reason for why you hear any of that, and I think of everybody as our client, right? If we're running a business, then they're consumers of our business in some way, right? And so I don't think that's unusual in a business term, business environment, to call people clients or consumers. That's kind of how I think about everybody who we're dealing with who's under our jurisdiction. But I will say this, our staff are asked not only to hold people accountable, but to do that rehabilitative function. And it's harder to do that if you come at people from that kind of going back to that aggressive, punitive stance. Like we're not in the position where we just get to just arrest somebody. We have staff who do arrest people, right, out on supervision, but then they have to also work with those people long-term. The goal for us is behavior change. It's really hard to instigate behavior change in somebody when you come at them like a jerk, right? And if you come at them aggressively. So just take, myself, for example. Someone comes at me and is like, hey, you know what? You're looking a little chunky. You ought to lose some weight. Immediately, my defenses are up, right? Immediately, yeah. I'm like, who are you? Take a walk. But if you come at people like, hey, you're a person, you're paying your price, you screwed up, you maybe hurt people, you maybe did something really bad to get here, but we're going to try and figure out how to get you to a different place so that you don't do that again. I think sometimes like building that rapport is critical to the work. And so as a result, you hear people talk differently about all the people that we work with.
A couple things. You earlier when we were talking about trades, you said, you'd have teachers that would come and teach the students, mm-hmm. right? And it caught me for a second. It's like, yeah, they're students. So if somebody's coming to teach you, you're a student, right? Yeah. Like that's the way it is. Yeah. And that only seems appropriate in the function of like, how are we engaging human beings in this moment? You have somebody who's trying to teach them something about electrical or framing or drywall, mm-hmm. and you have somebody who's trying to learn something. The person who's trying to learn something is in fact a student, and the person who's teaching is in fact a teacher. Now, they might be a student that's also incarcerated or had committed a criminal act, but they're still a student in that moment. So from that standpoint, it's like, yeah, I 100% get what you're saying, which is, look, who is this person in this moment and what are we trying to do with them? The other thing man, this is a little dark. I was thinking about this just the other day, it is in my personal life. I deeply agree that the way you refer to somebody will 100% have a degree of effect on how they view themselves and how they ultimately will function within the world. And when I was in college, I had a really, I'll say, bad coach, right? And D1 athletics, obviously not like being incarcerated, right? But when you're 18 and you have an adult that's in charge of you, what's really interesting about transitioning into D1 athletics is when you're in high school, everybody cares about you. You got like parents rooting for you. Mm-hmm. You got mom and dad picking you up or, whatever, you're around your friends. You have all of these support and safety networks, somebody making you food, people really care about you. And, your parents, hopefully come to mine didn't, but like you have parents that come to your, sporting events and everything. They understand the relationships that you're going through. You go from graduating high school to 3 months later, you're now off in college. Nobody sees what's happening. Nobody knows. And if you don't stay connected with your parents, as I didn't, then nobody's checking in on you. And you can end up, and I've spoken with a lot of former athletes, you know, some of which that like lost kidneys, like D1 athletic can be very insane. And we see some examples of that just kind of poke through the ether and be like, whoa, that's crazy. But unless you've been there, you really don't know. And one of my coaches really, when I was younger, just beat the living hell out of me. And, you know, would just, it was very dark, right? And come race day, there was no piece of my head or psyche that thought there was any possibility that I was winning anything. And I criticized myself a lot as a younger person for, you know, not believing in myself. But, you know, at some point it's like, listen, if you're 18 and somebody calls you like a pathetic loser, waste of space every single day, when it's race day and they want you to like thrive and you're in the pit of hell in the middle of a race, you can't even see straight, you're going to default to what has been in your head the entire time. And that's it. Right? When you're in a stress situation, you're going to default to like what you deeply believe of yourself. And if what you deeply believe of yourself is that you're like a loser and you're never going to win anyway, then like you're not going to fight the altar. You're like, yeah, well, this is exactly where I should be, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, I've never been incarcerated, but I would have to imagine that if, you know, you do have that perspective of somebody just saying that you're like this terrible person all day long, every day, and you get out in a stressful situation, you're going to default to like, well, I'm a terrible person anyway.
Absolutely. And I think the piece that you're talking about when you're sharing your personal story is, you know, what your parents, your other support system did for you was like remind you that wasn't who you were, right? And so if you have outside influence who's balancing that, and I think that's part of our role. I actually think we have to instill some level of hope for people because a lot of the folks that we're dealing with, excuse me, are feeling like you during your D1 career and having that terrible coach. And all they've had is terrible experience, you know, in whether that's, you know, family, it's society, it's whatever. But they feel like all I am is this loser who can't do this, or they feel really confident because they're, you know, maybe they're in a gang, maybe they're running drugs, maybe they're doing a bunch of really negative stuff, but they feel like that's given them a sense of power and safety in the moment. And that feels good, right? Because they don't feel like I'm a loser right now. But I think part of the work that our staff are charged with doing is helping people start to see something in themselves that maybe they don't see at the moment. To say, you know what, I've seen a glimmer of hope here. I know that you don't have to be this forever. You can be different. You can be better. And when we can ignite that, and I mean, I get to hear those stories usually years later, which they're super empowering because it's like, oh, I had this one teacher who, you know, I remember this one lesson and he or she said, you know, whatever it is to me. And that just turned on a light bulb and I knew I had to do things differently. And you can track some of the folks who've been incarcerated with us who years and years of just being a pain, right? Just not getting along, just being non-compliant, just having uses of force on them because they just refuse to go along and to follow the rules. And they spend a lot of time in close custody, which is like maximum custody. And then all of a sudden they have these interactions, they have these small moments, usually with staff, and it could be a correctional officer, a teacher, it could be anybody. And something triggers for them and they're like, oh, there's a different way. And then you just see them start to turn their lives around. And I mean, you can clearly look at their incarceration record and it's fascinating to say like problem. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait. Now we go months without a problem. Now we go a year without a problem. Like what's happening for that person? And now you've got some of those people who they're plugging in and giving back to other people who are incarcerated. And they're saying, hey, I see in you what I used to be like, and you can do this too. And it's super powerful when you get to see that. And that's the work, right? That's what we're constantly battling. But I think, you know, just going back quickly to the language, what you were just saying about being a student, and I do think about that too. I think about that for myself. You know, when I walk into a doctor's office, I'm a patient. When I walk into our office, I'm the director. When I walk at home, I'm not the director of anything. You know what I mean? Like, but we all are, we're different roles, but we're the same people. And so I think a lot of the tension here is how do we do the work in a way that, you know, gets us the outcomes we want as a state, we want safety, right? We are fortunate that we have a very safe state right now. And how do we maintain that? And I don't think you maintain that by just treating people like crap. I think it's what you're talking about. It's a little bit of, you can be kind of firm, fair, and consistent. You can teach people skills, you can hold them accountable, and you can show them that they can do this differently.
Well, you also, to your last point, how do we make a safe state? Okay, let's say we have 10,000 people right now incarcerated in the state of Idaho. Mm-hmm. And let's say in 10 years, we'll have another 10,000. And in another 10 years, we'll have another 10,000. So over a 20-year period, we'll have 30,000 people that are either currently incarcerated or previously incarcerated. If we don't do something to get the initial 10,000 people not coming back, mm-hmm. and then the second 10,000 people not coming back, and safely integrating into society so that they're safe and society's safe, we're going to have 30,000 people that are either currently or previously incarcerated that are making our state worse. And we're never, it would be great if we could stop people from committing crime before they commit it, like Minority Report style. Like, we need Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah.
like, fine, that would be great, but that's not how this goes. Like, we live in an imperfect world with mm-hmm. people that struggle with life, and those people have kids, and those kids, can be brought up in difficult situations, mm-hmm. and that stinks. Like, that's really terrible. And like, wouldn't it be great if we could stop all of that? Yes, it would, but that's not reality. And nobody has a play for that right now.
Right.
What we need to do is figure out how we safely and effectively manage people that have now come under our care through incarceration, because we all have the agreement that it's like, if we lock you up, we're going to give you medical care, we're going to feed you, we're not going to let you starve to death, mm-hmm. right? Like, this is the only way the state stays safe, at least it seems in my view, which is not compounding the incarceration problem, right? If we have the people that are currently incarcerated continue to be incarcerated in the corrections facility or system in some way for the rest of their life, the state is only going to add on more and more and more and more people, and it's going to become distinctly less safe for all of us.
Yeah. And I think, like we said before, most people get out of the system. Most people will release from prison. They'll have some period on supervision, and then sure. they'll move on with their lives. Right. And we focus often on the negative in our business, which is a really weird business model. Like we focus on failure, right? We talk about recidivism, which is how many people failed. We don't talk about how many people succeeded. And, those are opposite sides of the same coin. But we know from the data, because we've been running right around 38% failure. You do the math, most people are actually successful. Most people can get out of the system. Now, can we drive down our recidivism number? Absolutely. And we should be. And that's where we're thinking about, we've been doing programming in our prisons facilities for years and years, and we do programs to address the things that I mentioned earlier as kind of those big factors for us. And we also address things like substance use. We address sex offending behavior, but there's more to be done, right? When we look at whole people and we assess all of their needs, which we do for every single person who comes in, we say, oh, here are all the domains in your life that we should care about that are contributing to your risk. And we will need to mitigate those. But then we only provide programs for like 4 of them. So what about all those other things? What about your family dysfunction? What about how you, fight with your spouse, or how you, haven't shown up as a parent? What are we doing in those spaces? What are we doing to make you think about giving back in a different way? So that's where I'm kind of excited. Actually, we're doing some stuff with peers right now in our facilities. And I think that work, it's very early days, so we don't have great outcome data on it yet. But the qualitative data on that is really super impactful and very positive. And that's using people with lived experience to help other people currently side by side with the same lived experience to start to take a different path.
When you talk about families, it brought me back to the third thing that you talked about, which is community connection culture. Essentially, look, if you leave the corrections system, no matter how good the correction system is, and you just land back in the same system that you're in with your community or your connections, if you're connected to 9 criminals, you're going to end up being a 10th criminal, right? And those connections are really tough. Like, there was a period of time in my adult life when I realized I was hanging out with not the right people. And I'm not saying these people were criminals, but it was like, this is not, people drinking a lot, not engaging the world in the way that was like, this is the best, this is going to yield the best result. Like, this will yield a result. It's not one that I want.
Yeah.
And it was very tough because I was actually already living here, and I had like left all my friends, my previous friends from the state that shall not be named. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, you know what you have to do. Like, it's over. You can't hang with these people. They're not bad people. They're just not the right people for you. Your life is not going to be what you want it to be. And that was a really, really hard thing to do. It was really not enjoyable. And it drew an enormous amount of criticism from them, particularly because, and I'm not the first person to point this out, but if you remove yourself from a bad group of people, those people instantaneously feel like seen or judged or criticized just by you saying like, hey, no, I don't want to do that thing. They're like, what, you think you're too good for this?
Yeah.
Like that's the classic thing. And I've experienced this in multiple times in my life where people, when I choose something better, what I think is better for me, the people that I then have to stop engaging with, instantaneously, it's like, no, come back down into the pit. Like you come back, you're not too.
Yeah.
How do you help people leaving, knowing they're going to be going into that? Knowing that the people that are excited to see them are likely going to be trying to drag them back into the pit. It's like, how do you help them transition? It's like, no, man, you need like a different world outside. And that world means different people. It means the whole different social connections, whole different way of thinking about freedom.
Yeah, it's the old misery loves company, right? And so when you try and separate from that, it tries to suck you back in, right? Because we're actually, a lot of times in those situations, not that happy with ourselves. And we want other people around us who are all equally unhappy with themselves so we can all kind of commiserate, right? And
they validate our experiences. It's like, listen, I'm not that bad for being an alcoholic because that guy's definitely an alcoholic too.
Yeah, and he's worse than me, right?
Yeah, he's like, I mean, look at him.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's really easy to get sucked back into that. And I think that's one of the things we have to be teaching people while they're incarcerated is the skills to manage that. And there's a couple parts of that. So one, you talk about when you separated and you're a well-functioning adult and you separated from your friends, it's still hard. It's still awkward. When you relocate, I relocated a couple of times as an adult. When you join a new community, you don't instantly have a friend network, right? You have to build that. It takes work, on those like meetup sites and running groups and biking group, right? You do, but you start to identify people who share common interests that are the positive interests you want to be doing and the things you're engaged in. And you build a community that way. But that's uncomfortable for people like you and me who are doing pretty well at life. And when you have never had success, am I making an assumption? I'm sorry.
No, when you say that, it's like, yeah, man, it is hard.
Yeah.
It is hard for somebody in a sober mind who knows what success and looks like and knows what they want their life to look like to step away from that. But like, that's because I knew what the target should look like.
Right.
If you never have the target, know what it looks like, don't know if you can recreate it, don't know anybody around you who's participating in that life, it's like, oh my gosh, man, like, how do you do that?
Yeah. And that's a part. I mean, so we're trying to teach those skills so people start to understand, like, how do you separate from friends? Because you're going to have the old friends who are knocking on your door saying, come on, it's cool. Come hang out with us. We're going to the bar. We're doing, and someone who just got released knows they're not supposed to do that. And so how do they navigate those? So we do a lot of role playing and that kind of stuff in our programming to help people prepare for real life situations that are going to happen. But the other thing is trying to build those connections. Like I said, when you think about, excuse me, at the CRCs, those community reentry centers, people really close to getting out into the community, that's the time to get them connected to some of those recovery supports. There are lots of recovery groups. There's AA, there's NA, there's all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people have substance use problems, not surprisingly, who are in our custody. So getting them to start showing up at those things, getting them to start, if there's a church community that's really important for them, maybe we start allowing them to go to some services so that they start, again, just outreach, connection, just building that so they don't walk out of, a prison for the first time and look around and say, okay,
how do I put this all back together?
Yeah, like where do I even start? Because they're going to start with what's familiar. And we're trying to get them to not do that.
Man, that seems so hard.
It is.
But you guys have a 62%, let's say, success rate where people never come back into contact with the corrections. Mm-hmm. Has there been anything done in recent past, and I know you've only been here for 2 months, but like, has there been anything done, any large programs or shifts or systems in place in Idaho or outside that has that has really moved that needle. It's like, okay, we went from 38 recidivism to like 35 or 34. Because, and I know those might seem like small numbers, but when you're talking about
thousands of people,
thousands of people, like that's a significant, like everybody would like it to go to zero, but that's like, if you can move it 10%, like that's a big shift. 10 or 15% is a big jump.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think historically here in Idaho, we've hovered in the 30s. So we've been from, I think our low was like 32 or 33 to like 39. So we tend to, last decade or so, we're kind of hovering right in the mid 30s. It's actually ticked up a little bit post-COVID. And when you got to remember, when we're talking about recidivism numbers, we're always looking at a group of people who got released, and they got released maybe in 21, and then we follow them for 3 years. We just get that data at the end of 24. So we're always kind of doing a look back. And so it's not exactly a current status, which is also problematic. But it's
hard to get correlation with, and like, okay, this program had effect. It's like, it's going to take 5 years to know if that had a positive effect.
Yeah, which kind of stinks. And so it's why we need to do, so I would argue for some different measures and corrections and just kind of like outcomes, but that's a whole nother discussion that gets real in the weeds. But I think, when you look around the country, and I look at these numbers pretty regularly to say, how are we comparing? We're not at the top of the pack. We're not at the bottom of the pack. We're kind of mid-packers, I would say. And there's difficulty in even comparing us apples to other states. So, a report came out on Texas, and it was proclaiming that their recidivism rate was like 20-something%, like very low. I think the lowest in the country right now is South Carolina is reporting like an 18%. I don't know how they're doing it, but in Texas, they reported like 22 or 23%. I called the data guy in Texas because I'm like, what are you guys doing? Tell us everything. And he said, well, some of it's math, because
they're out mathing you. Oh my gosh.
Well, some of it is the systems are set up differently. So they have what they call intermediate sanctions. They have these options for people who, if they're on supervision and they're struggling, and they would normally, like, we would revoke them back to prison, they'd count as a recidivist. They don't. They send them to these other programs. And they have several different bites at the apple there. So none of those numbers get counted in recidivism. So when you look and you're like, oh, geez, we're, 15 points higher than them, like, what's going on? You have to understand what's going on behind those numbers too. So
did you get from the Texas guy, did you get like, hang on, if you add in all those little bites to like the halfway programs, if you like break parole and stuff?
I didn't actually. That would be interesting. And
let's call him right now. like, hey, Steve.
Yeah, he could probably tell us. But yeah, I mean, so there's more to it, I think, than sometimes what you see on paper. But for us, we haven't had any major programmatic shifts. We've had a core set of programs that deal with, like I said, substance abuse, sex offending, thinking, aggression. Those are offered pretty broadly at most of our facilities, and they have been for more than a decade. I think, given what we're seeing in the numbers, the fact that it's not going down tells me there's more to do. And that's where I'm excited about some of these, like the peer mentoring work. That's just fascinating to me. It's been used in the substance use community with success for years.
Sure.
It's been used in the mental health community, but for some reason in corrections, we haven't done it until pretty recently. There are a lot of states and countries actually that are doing that now, and we're one of them. And like I said, a little early to get numeric data on it, but what we are seeing is people making choices to actually serve others. And I think we all know, if you go and volunteer in the community, you always feel better doing that, probably than even the people receiving whatever service you're providing. And so when we see people mentoring, it's not only helping bring along a group of people who are trying to get to change, it's like kind of solidifying the change in the people who are mentoring the others. And, we're seeing them plug in really helpful ways in our facilities, like actually bringing problems to staff that staff wouldn't know about, so that staff can take action, So it's kind of it's like you have to get your mind around it a little. It sounds weird. Like, why would you have mentors in prison? But the reality is they're kind of like, I don't want to say they're staff, but, they're almost like, they're kind of like liaisons between the bulk of the population who are incarcerated and staff. And they like can tell us they're an early warning system, I guess is a good way to say it, of, some things that are happening, things that are brewing, concerns that are rising, that we should be working on. Not in a, hey, we're just going to rat out these people, but like, let's solve this problem. Like, there's something going on here. Maybe these two are fighting and we don't know why. We don't what we don't want fighting in our area. We want like a safe housing unit. So how do we work with staff to say, could you get these guys moved or separated, or, you know what I mean? Like, so there's really practical things that are happening as a result of the mentoring program.
Well, I mean, look, we all have role models.
Yeah.
Whether or not we call them role models, but
yeah.
I think it's because of the propensity of people to live life by analogy, and obviously our great capacity to be, you know, for lack of a better word, jealous or desirous of what other people have, right? Like that's part of the 10 Commandments, like don't go after your neighbor's wife, right? Like, because we all look around at things that we want. And that could be, hey, look, I want to be rich like that guy. It could be, hey, I want the amount of respect that people show that guy, right? And it, you know, I've never been in a prison system, but even in contemporary society, like I have people that I consider kind of role models that have no idea that I look to them and like really closely pay attention and ask questions like, okay, how did this person get there? Because that's really important. So we all have those in a corrections system. If you don't have a positive person standing next to everybody else, like who are they going to look up to, right? How are we going to figure out like, okay, this is how I move through my day to get what I want, right? Like it only seems common sense that you would have some degree of like, okay, this is the right type of person to have around these individuals.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, our staff hopefully are serving as some role model too, because the reality is, especially when you're incarcerated, you have a lot of free time and you're watching and you're listening. And I'm going to tell this to all of our new employees. I'm like, you're kind of the reality show, right? Right? Like how you show up at work, if you're tired and you look all haggard, or if you're, you know, in a really good mood, or how you get along with other people, if you follow through with what you say you're going to do or you don't, like people are watching and listening and learning those skills, whether you mean to kind of teach them those skills or not. So it's incumbent on our staff to come in professionally and to serve as role models, right? Like I'm hoping they're showing, how do you deal with difficult situations? How do you keep your calm? How do you stay poised and, you know, under pressure? I hope they're teaching those skills on the daily. But also there's a level of credibility they'll never have. Right? Our staff haven't been incarcerated. I haven't been incarcerated. So I can teach the best program ever, but I've never walked in those shoes. And so when you do have people who've had that lived experience sharing that, like, yeah, I've done that. I've chosen to be involved in, you know, all the negative stuff. I've been a pain in the butt. I've done everything wrong. And I'm still now, look at who I am. Now I'm proud to be, you know, a dad who's actually engaged with my kids, and maybe I'm talking about their homework on calls instead of sending me money. And now I'm, you know, mending relationships with my family because I'd stolen things from them, or I'd burned bridges, or whatever. And so I think that being like, having walked in those shoes, it's just, it's a level of credibility we'll never have. And so why would we not do that?
Yeah, man, it's kind of like having an AA group leader who doesn't have a problem with alcohol.
Yeah,
like you're not.
Yeah,
even if even if they say the right thing, like you can make the right noise with your face. Yeah, but I don't believe you. Like in my heart, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
You know, like you gotta feel like this person was in hell with you, or was in hell and got out of it, and you know that. Again, it comes back to belief. It's like, if this person can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
Right. Or if this person can do it, I know it can be done. I don't even know if I can do it, but I know it can be done somehow. You're like, you got to have that. That's only common sense.
Yeah.
Director Bree Derrick, my gosh, we've been at this for a while. We have. It was like the screensaver came on, so I know it's been well over an hour.
Oh, shoot.
No, it's 100% great. I have a lot of questions specifically about it. Like, I'd love to get into the weeds with you a little bit, but you know, like we've done a lot so far. I'd love to have you come back and keep the conversation going. Is there anything you'd like to kind of hit here at the end, or anything we've missed? I mean, I know we've missed a lot, but.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I would love to cover. You know, the one thing I would say, because I think it's like a misconception just generally about the system, is like where we start and end. And so I think, not that I want to end on this particularly, but I want to say, the purview of the Idaho Department of Corrections is pretty broad, right? We are the largest law enforcement agency in the state. We have 2,200 employees, and the vast majority of our staff are sworn. And so I think sometimes that's a little bit lost in the conversation about who we are and what our role is. And so again, I would say we're here for accountability and rehabilitation. And we have people, once they're convicted of a felony, who get sentenced to probation, retained jurisdiction sentence, which is kind of a they get some prison and then maybe more, or maybe probation, or they get sentenced directly to prison. The one piece that I think is really important for listeners to appreciate is we don't have a mechanism in the Idaho Department of Corrections to release people early. We don't do releases early. We don't have any mandate, any ability to do that. So if people are getting released into the community short of serving their entirety of their term, their prison term, then they are being released because the parole commission has decided that they can be safely released into the community. And I think sometimes there's a confusion there that the parole, the Commission on Pardons and Parole is a separate agency from IDOC. And I think that's really important. So
you guys are essentially the building. You are not the gatekeeper. Who gets sent in and who gets released out, that's not you. You're like, listen, we keep the walls up and we keep the lights on.
That is correct. And then once they get released, if they get released onto supervision, we're the supervision agency. And I think that's where it gets really muddy, because you've got this, the Commission on Pardons and Parole sort of sits in between the facility and the supervision. And they're the ones who make the best decision they can about community safety and if someone's ready. And I just think that's often, it's just in the conversations I've been having these last couple of months, it's a point that's often confused. And people think that the parole commission is, reports to me or is beholden to me in some way, and they're absolutely not. So they're making independent decisions based on the best information they have in front of them. So I think that's important. And, if we're wrapping up, I got to say, our agency actually does amazing work. We have some really dedicated staff. And I think why we're in a place where people are coming to the work because they actually want to help people change. And I get to meet with almost every new employee that we have in our agency. And I always ask them what they're surprised about or what brought them here. And by and large, what I'm hearing is, I want to plug in and make change. I want to make the community safer. I think the role of IDOC is really important. And so I think that's just worth saying at every turn. The people who are coming to work for us actually care about public safety in the state of Idaho, because they're residents too, they're taxpayers too, and they're coming to the work in a way that I think is going to pay off long-term for us.
That's beautiful. I don't know a lot of people that work in corrections, but I know some, and they're really good people. I consider them friends, some very good friends. And yeah, it's not a cliche. I know a lot of people through jiu-jitsu, right? Mm-hmm. And you learn a lot about people very quickly when you're engaged with them in that way, because you find out if they're trying to be a bully. Mm-hmm. You find out if they're mean. You find out if they're cruel when you're in a compromised position. Are they going to take advantage of you? Mm-hmm. And I have not ever found that to be the case in my experiences with them. So when you say they're good people, I can attest to it from the people that I know. Yeah.
It's great to hear.
Thank you for coming in today. Let's do this again.
Thanks. Yeah, it was awesome.